leaving the world of technology, entering the world of Epictetus is a perfect segue. I know there's sort of three elements you think about that I've heard you talk about. One, I use the language of new normal, which I borrow from our mutual friend, retired Vice Admiral Mike Lefevre, who talks about your new normal is not what it used to be. The idea of normalcy bias and how things were used to be, that's gone. So we have to accept the new reality. And then I want to talk briefly, just hear your thoughts on the human factor, which in the world of Epictetus is far more important than certainly the technological age that so many people in medicine were familiar with. And then your notes on humility, which I think are a perfect way to talk about the ground truth as we move into guidance.
Yeah, sure. When let's take, again, I can just use my community, our community, and other typical military training programs that are, stressful by nature for a reason, right? What we do is we construct, I'm not saying we should teach high-level neuroscience to a basic trainee, right? But we construct an environment of some level of stress inoculation based on what the trainee, in theory, can absorb. And we think of that just almost as like a training schedule. Like if you do hard stuff, you can do hard stuff tomorrow, and you can do hard stuff the next day, and you get used to it, and you get used to it, and you get used to it. And that's true. Like people obviously get conditioned to stressful environments, and then if they're reflective enough and think about their own experiences deeply enough, when another stressful environment comes up, you can kind of like connect the past to the present and to the future, so to speak, and you can complete that picture. But I think, having been out of the military for 9 years now and working with all the different types of teams that you and I have worked with, from creatives to athletes to, people jumping from space to you name it, there's more to the story on the human factor. And I don't think that there's, a magic fairy dust that right in this conversation, we can leave people with 10 beautiful skills to prevent like serious, stress or burnout. That's not the point. But there's a couple things to keep in mind, and healthcare workers and doctors will know these terms better than I do. I'm obviously not a doctor, but it's really like a 4-segment thing to remember that I try to remember about the human body when it's going through stuff like this, which is again, the doctors will know. There's a cook in the kitchen, there's a smoke detector, there's a watchtower, and there's a timekeeper. In the words of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. And the cook is essentially the thalamus, which is absorbing all the sensory inputs, right? And use our training. There's cold water, there's swimming, there's instructor pressure, there's social pressure, there's leadership pressure, there's, am I going to graduate right? The body's absorbing sensory input, everything from the basics to the complicated social complex stuff. There's our smoke detector, of course, the amygdala, which is just responding to threat and answering that threat with either action or inaction, a series of things, of course. There's our watchtower, let's just call it the frontal lobe, the medial prefrontal cortex, which is trying to essentially keep, I just call it like common sense decision-making and executive function and cortical authority in check, right? And then there's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the timekeeper, which essentially takes all the sensory input, the amygdala's reactions, cortical authority, and please, the doctors who know more about this, correct me if I'm wrong, and essentially connects past to present to future. Here's what gets dangerous in an environment like this where we haven't been exposed to it over and over. So we have an immediate recognition that not everything is a threat, or we just don't have it like in our natural demeanor, right? And so what will happen, what you see all the time, is someone gets into this environment, and because they never had the experience in the past before, and it's happening to them right now, they have no idea how long it's going to last or how severe the effects are going to be. Their timekeeper essentially goes offline. Like, I can't say that it's fully offline, but you know what I mean, is like the context of the severity of the crisis is out of whack. And what happens? Our most primal instincts kick in. You see it in training all the time. Everything becomes a threat. Everything that's a change is a threat. Back to this idea of new normal. And so what this can do, as again, the doctors know better than I do, is the chemical, the hormonal, valence left in our systems will clearly, like mentally and physically, wear somebody's sympathetic nervous system down to the bone. And this is what we know, obviously, in the military as some sort of, and I think it's just a baloney term to say post-traumatic disorder. It's post-trauma from anything. It's like your boss yelling at you, your parents yelling at you when you're a kid, your coach berating you in whatever sport you played. It's some sort of like stress valence that stays with you for a long period of time. And I think as it pertains to the human factor, even some awareness or recognition that there's a lot of sensory input coming into everybody's system right now is useful. What you do with that in terms of tactics, that's a whole nother conversation, right? Because I think one of the things that a lot of frontline medical leaders could be thinking about and reflecting on right now is there's just no time for a break, right? You can't, you get these, I'm one of them, you're one of them, a lot of people listening to, you get folks in this environment who just try to get everything on the to-do list done every 24 hours. It ain't happening. Like even on a combat deployment, like you have to somehow, and people are already doing this, but I'm just giving the encouragement that this is what it's like on a real deployment as well, is you have to really over prioritize the things that have to happen. We call them the 7-meter target. You know, it's right in front of your face. And it's a trade-off. We would always say, as you know, Brian, it's risk, R-I-S-K, risk to force versus risk to mission. The more you try to protect your people, the more you potentially compromise the mission. The more you are hyper-focused only on the mission, you might compromise your people. It's a risk to force, risk to mission balance. And so I say that because if you're 2, 3, 4 weeks into this, a doctor really on the front lines in a certain part of the country, sometimes you just have to stop work and leave, right? There's a rotation for a reason. But people, in terms of the human factor, you see it on deployment all the time and coming home from deployment, people cannot just run the race car in the red because nobody's body and mind is that strong. Like people will start to break.